Theo thống kê của Bộ Y tế, chứng đau nhưng xương khớp là bệnh lý vô cùng nghiêm trọng, không điều trị kịp thời sẽ làm tăng nguy cơ tim mạch, đột quỵ, biến dạng khớp dẫn đến tàn phế, bại liệt rất nguy hiểm.
Một bước tiến mới cho người mắc bệnh xương khớp là mới đây các nhà khoa học công nghệ quốc tế đã chiết xuất thành công viên nén hỗ trợ điều trị bệnh xương khớp. Ứng dụng công nghệ EECV hàng đầu châu Âu giúp tăng hiệu quả điều trị lên gấp 10 lần, nhờ đó rút ngắn thời gian điều trị và chi phí cho người bệnh.
Tôi Đông y sĩ Cảnh Thiên xin kính chào quý vị. Nếu quý vị đang bị đau đầu gối, đau vai cổ, đau khớp tay, đau lưng, rồi các cơn đau lan rộng xuống chân theo dây thần kinh tọa, xong rồi tay chân nó tê bì, căng cứng, mỏi cơ giữa các khớp thì kêu lục cục muốn, để mà chữa khỏi dứt điểm thì nhất định các bạn phải sử dụng cái viên sủi Effervescent Bones Joint này để hỗ trợ bà con Việt kiều bên này. Chúng tôi quyết định bán với mức giá bán ưu đãi chỉ 50 USD một chai sủi. Quý vị xin lưu ý, giá này chỉ có khi quý vị mua trực tiếp từ trang chính thống của chúng tôi ngay tại đây. Bởi sao tôi bán với mức giá này? Vì tôi và các công sự của tôi trực tiếp nghiên cứu và sản xuất ra. Bất kỳ sản phẩm nào được bán với giá khác hoặc qua kênh không chính thống đều là hàng giả, hàng kém chất lượng. Quý vị cứ gọi trực tiếp số hotline trên màn hình. Quý vị cứ gọi qua, uống chỉ 3 tháng thôi, khỏe luôn. Thì thường là chúng tôi sẽ free shipping tất cả các tiểu bang ở Hoa Kỳ. Quý vị chỉ trả số tiền, đúng số tiền mà quý vị mua cái lọ thuốc đó thôi.
Từ khi Đan Trường dùng Effervescent One Joint này Đan Trường cảm thấy các vấn đề xương khớp của mình được cải thiện rõ rệt. Đan Trường chỉ mới dùng Effervescent khoảng một thời gian thôi, mà những cơn đau nhức ở lưng nè, ở cổ nè, vai gáy của Đan Trường giảm đi rõ rệt, không còn cảm giác tê bì khó chịu nữa.
Tôi và các cộng sự đã dành 25 năm để nghiên cứu điều chế và lấy được cấp phép FDA Hoa Kỳ, chứ không phải đơn giản. Tôi nói Effervescent Bones Joints thần kỳ, bởi sao? Bởi nó giúp tái tạo sụn khớp, kích thích sản sinh hoạt dịch, thì đây chính là cái nguyên do khiến cho các khớp xương rồi nó kêu lục cục. Chính vì thế mà nó sẽ làm tiêu viêm, tiêu sưng, làm lành các địa điểm thoái hóa, lành bao xơ và phục hồi các đầu xương. Trong suốt hơn 50 năm chúng tôi làm việc cũng như là chữa trị cho bệnh nhân, tôi thấy là về y khoa đối với những người cao tuổi đó quý vị, đặc biệt là phụ nữ từ 50 tuổi trở lên ấy, để đau nhức thì trong này có hết khoảng 80% là đau vai cổ, đau lưng và đau đầu gối. Rất nhiều người phải ngồi xe lăn đến hết cuộc đời.
Chỉ sau hơn 1 tháng sử dụng, Hương Lan đã cảm nhận rõ rệt sự khác biệt. Xương khớp trơn tru hơn, linh hoạt hơn. Những cơn tê khi mà trái gió trở trời hay là ngồi lâu cũng giảm đáng kể. Mình trực tiếp sử dụng, trực tiếp trải nghiệm và thấy thật sự hiệu quả. Vui quá nên lên chia sẻ ngay với mọi người.
Tiến trình bệnh xương khớp diễn biến rất phức tạp, thì video sau tôi sẽ giải thích cho quý vị. Thì viên sủi Effervescent Bones Joint này nó là sự cải tiến và kết hợp của nhiều dòng thuốc điều trị xương khớp thế hệ trước. Sau mấy mươi năm chúng tôi đã sản xuất và điều trị, và chúng tôi thấy cái kết quả của nó phải trên là 8.000 ca chữa bệnh về viêm đau và thoái hóa khớp. Chúng tôi thấy kết quả ngoài sự mong đợi. Xin nhấn mạnh, đây là trang chính thống để mua Effervescent Bones Joint với mức giá ưu đãi. Quý vị đừng vì ham rẻ mà mua phải hàng giả, hàng kém chất lượng. Hãy đặt niềm tin vào thuốc được sản xuất trực tiếp bởi chúng tôi.
Hey everybody, this is Russ Metro Game Core. Today we are going to do a review of the Retroid Pocket G2. And this is essentially a spec bump of the Retroid Pocket 5, which came out last year. Same screen, same shell and everything, it just has a faster CPU. It also has a similar price point of about $200 before shipping. Now we're going to cover the basics in this video. We'll talk about how it looks and feels in the hands, but I mostly want to focus on the performance and what you're going to get. And Retroid has made a name for themselves by offering excellent price to performance, and I think that the RPG2 really pushes the envelope even further. And so at face value, it's very easy to recommend this handheld because it does have the best performance I've ever seen around that $200 price point. But at the same time, Retroid is not making that decision very easy because they've already launched the pre-order campaign of their next handheld, the Retroid Pocket 6, with a more powerful processor, a better screen, and it's only $10 more. As you can imagine, we've got a lot to unpack in this review, so grab your favorite snack and drink. Let's go ahead and get started. Okay, let's dive into the specs. This is all going to be very close to the Retroid Pocket 5 other than the CPU. This new model has the Snapdragon G2 Gen 2. This is a performance and gaming-minded chipset made by Qualcomm. And according to Retroid, it should give you nearly twice the performance power of the Retroid Pocket 5, which had the Snapdragon 865 chip. The amount of RAM and storage is the same as it was on the previous model, 8 gigs of RAM and 128 gigs internal. Like with the other one, it has a microSD card slot if you want to expand your storage that way. The display is also the same. It's AMOLED, 5.5 inches, and 1080p in resolution. We've also still got a 5000 mAh battery, and it does charge up to 27 watts fast charge. As far as connectivity, we've got Wi-Fi 6 and Bluetooth 5.4, and it does have a 3.5mm headphone jack. Now, because this is a more recent chip, it does run a more recent version of Android. It's running Android 15. And other than that, everything else is pretty straightforward. It's got rumble motors, some Hall sensor analog sticks, as well as active cooling. And like I mentioned in the intro, the starting price is going to be $200 during the pre-order campaign, but that's only going to be good for about another 3 or 4 days. And after that, it's going to go to $220 retail. And so even though you can get it for cheaper as of making this video, I'm thinking of it as a $220 device. One of the great things about Retroid products is they have different color options. They've got 5 total right now. The middle 3 here, the GameCube, the tan 16-bit, as well as the black ones, those are all available with the Retroid Pocket 5, but we have these new colors, turquoise and yellow, which I think kind of look like they're modeled after the older Nintendo Switch lights, and I think they look awesome. And I've got a couple different models here to take a look at here in the studio. Now, I think the biggest competition for the Retroid Pocket G2 is the next generation Retroid device called the Retroid Pocket 6. This one's going to be running the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2, which is an older but more powerful processor, and it also has a couple additional bells and whistles. This one has a similar 5.5-inch OLED display, but it goes up to 120 Hertz. It also has a 6000 mAh battery. And after getting customer feedback and running a poll, they have decided to actually offer 2 different control style options with either the analog stick or the D-pad up top. And when you put this all together, it's only $10 more expensive than the Retroid Pocket G2 for quite a few additional options. On top of that, they also offer an upgraded model for $50 more that will come with 12 gigs of RAM and 256 gigs of internal storage. So as of making this video, the only drawbacks that we have with this particular handheld is that we haven't really seen this particular design just yet, so we don't know how it's going to feel ergonomically. And then also it does not launch until around January of next year. And so there's about a 2-month wait at this point. And so comparing Retroid to Retroid, it's a pretty fine line between the two, and I think it really comes down to timing and whether or not you want a device before the holidays or if you're willing to wait until after. So let's take a look at the Retroid Pocket G2. I actually have 2 of them here in the studio. The first is a review unit that was sent over. It's the GameCube color here. I actually haven't opened this one at all, and that's because I also have the turquoise color here. This is the one that I bought myself, but they just rushed my order over, so I got the retail one at the same time that my review unit arrived. And as far as I can tell, this is the same packaging as the Retroid Pocket 5. So inside you will get the device, as well as a quick manual, and then also your USB-C charging cable. And so here's a look at the GameCube model. It's identical to the Retroid Pocket 5, and honestly, I don't really have a use for this because I've got my retail unit already, so I'm just going to give this away. I'll have a link in the video description if you want to try to pick it up. So the turquoise one is the one that I ordered and the one that we'll be reviewing here today, but like with all my videos, they're not going to see this video ahead of time, no money was exchanged in any way, and all opinions are my own. Now, I've had this handheld for a few days, and my first impression was that, yeah, it's basically just a Retroid Pocket 5, and that's not a bad thing. This is such a nice, refined handheld. It's got those D-pad-centric controls to it, which makes it feel nice and classic, but then also it has this all-glass front, which makes it look very sleek as well. And so it's kind of this weird mix between modern and retro. I love the feeling of like the texture and the plastic on the back here. It's all nice and rounded too. Like there's so many things that I love about this that I've talked about in my other videos. And even though this design is about a year old, I think it still holds up. It's a really excellent handheld. Still to this day, every time I pick it up, I'm like, man, they really did a good job with its overall design. In terms of size, it's about the same as a cell phone, but a little bit longer with some ergonomic bumps on the back. You can still fit it in your pocket depending on the size of your pocket, but personally, I've never really considered this to be a pocketable handheld. Instead, I'd rather put it in a case or in a bag and carry it around that way. And in terms of mid-tier handhelds, I think it's a Goldilocks style size just because it's quite portable, but then also very comfortable to use on its own. I can play this on the couch, but then also on the go. It's a little bit smaller than the Switch Lite, but with the same size screen. And I think that really says a lot about this product because it's got this nice, compact, refined size to it and feels a lot more elegant. The ergonomic bumps on the back aren't super prominent, but they're just enough to give you a little bit of a cushion, and I do find it to be very comfortable. And so here we are 1 year after the Retroid Pocket 5 released, and yes, this is still an excellent body design. And where this thing really excels is in D-pad centric gameplay, just because your thumbs will naturally rest right here, and I think it's an excellent position for them. The analog sticks themselves can get the job done, especially when playing like single analog stick games, but I've never found this to be an excellent fit when it comes to dual analog stick gameplay. And so right out of the box, there are going to be some moments where ergonomically this just doesn't make a lot of sense. I don't like playing first-person shooter games or anything where I'm using both analog sticks at the same time, just because it feels a little bit awkward. Now, Retroid offers their own grips on their website. They're $15. They are TPU, which means they're a little bit bendy. And you can also find 3D printed options on Etsy. I made a whole video about it. I'll leave a link down below. And because we have the exact same shell here, the Retroid Pocket 5 grip works perfectly here. $15 to basically fix all of your ergonomic issues. This allows me to play with dual stick games, no problem. It's not a perfect setup, but a lot more comfortable like this. The only problem here is that it does make it a little bit less portable just because you have these additional grips. But I would say if you are concerned about overall ergonomics, then I think that a $15 grip like this is an easy solution. So in summary, yes, the design on the Retroid Pocket 5 was amazing, and it still is awesome on the Retroid Pocket G2. I really love this new color option as well. The white on turquoise is really cool. I also really like the yellow on white option too, but this one is probably my favorite. Let's talk about the controls in case you're new to all this stuff. This is a dome switch style D-pad, so it kind of looks like a PS Vita D-pad, and it feels like it too. It's got this nice kind of soft click to it when you push it in any direction. It doesn't have a ton of travel, but it still feels very responsive and clicky. And what I love about this D-pad is that it feels very responsive and precise. I can play a precision platformer like Celeste and know exactly which direction I want to move in, and I get that soft click feedback when I do. This is the same D-pad that Retroid has been using for several years at this point, and I hope they continue to use it because it's one of my favorites. The analog sticks are also the classic stick we have seen from Retroid over the years as well. They are Hall sensor, they have a wide range of motion to them, and they feel excellent. More recent devices like the Retroid Pocket Flip 2 have had a grippier cap to them, but these do not have that. They're more smooth. It's also worth noting these analog sticks do have RGB lighting to them. You can go in and change out the color however you would like. Personally, I just prefer to leave them off. The face buttons are the same as they were on the Retroid Pocket 5. They have rubber membrane connection to them, which means that they have a bit of travel to them, more of a classic sort of feel. But one of my main complaints about this device has always been that these buttons feel a little bit clacky. They are easily the loudest part of this whole device. It's not the end of the world. They still feel very good, but I do wish that the travel was a little bit shallower on them. Let me give you a quick listen here to what they sound like. So at the end of the day, I don't find them to be a deal breaker, but I do wish that they had a little bit less travel and weren't so loud. But other than that, I've got no complaints. Also on the front, we've got some menu buttons. So select and start up top, and then we've got a home button and a back button for Android function. And beyond that, we've got our two front-firing stereo speakers. These have never been award-winning by any means, but I think they get the job done. Let me give you a quick audio test. So personally, I think they're a little bit muffled sounding, but still above average and definitely enjoyable to me. One thing worth noting is the speaker placement makes it so that you kind of cover a little bit of the speaker holes with the meaty part of your palm, and it's not the end of the world. I don't think it affects the audio that much, but if you've got bigger hands than my medium-sized hands, it might become a problem. The only other observation I have about this overall control design is that I wish that this right analog stick, and honestly the left one too, were a little bit more inboard. I think it's probably the biggest ergonomic failure of this handheld, because even as I'm just pressing the D-pad and the face buttons, I can feel my thumbs slightly touching the analog sticks, which can be kind of annoying too. Again, I don't think it's a deal breaker, but I think it's something that Retroid could improve upon in future releases. I don't like the fact that I'm pressing on the analog stick as I'm playing. Up top, we've got our volume up and down, then our power button, which you can tap to go to sleep, and then finally our shoulders and triggers. I've always been a big fan of these, especially the feel of them. They've got a nice texture to them that makes them a little bit grippy. These shoulder buttons are micro switches, and they're a little bit clicky. I wish they were dampened a little bit more, but thankfully they are easy to press down on. The triggers also feel pretty good. They are analog input and pretty light to touch, and they also have a fair amount of throw to them as well. And so, yeah, no complaints about the controls up top either. On the back, you can see our fan intake and our exhaust, and then also these two ergonomic bumps that we talked about earlier. And then finally down below, we've got a flap for our micro SD card compartment, our 3.5mm headphone jack, and then our USB-C port, which is capable of video out 1080p 60Hz. Okay, let's talk briefly about the display. We have seen this many times over. It was in the Retroid Pocket 5, the Retroid Pocket Flip 2, as well as the Retroid Pocket dual screen attachment. So we've seen this thing all over. And honestly, I think that's a good thing. It's a beautiful display, 5.5 inches, 1080p, and it's OLED. I've always found the quality of this panel to be excellent too. We've got a nice color balance as well as contrast ratio, and then the saturation really makes these colors pop. It can also get very bright. This is it at 100% brightness, and I personally think this is bright enough to be able to play outdoors. Here I am in a sunny environment, but in the shade, and you can see that yes, this is very easy to see, and even if I angle my camera so that it's in direct sunlight, everything is still visible to me as well. So I do think that thanks to this screen, this is a handheld that you can take outdoors and enjoy. Another excellent feature is that this screen gets nice and dark to the point where it's really hard to see unless you're in a dark environment. Even turning off the studio lights, you can barely see that anything is happening, and I think that's a great sign. That means that you'll be able to play this thing in the dark. In fact, the major complaint that I've seen about this handheld and when playing it in bed next to your significant other is that these face buttons are a little bit clacky and loud, but from a screen perspective, yeah, it's spot on. Okay, let's take a look at the software. There's not a lot to go on here. It is identical to all the other Retroid devices. So it is an Android-based handheld, which means you just need to install all of your apps and your emulators, then use a front end to put it all together. I've got a whole startup guide about how to set up an Android-based handheld. I will leave it linked down below. And I already set this thing up a couple nights ago with all of my emulators, and then I use a front end called Emulation Station Desktop Edition to wrap it all together. So I can go through here, navigate through my different systems, choose my game, and then launch it. The theme that I'm using is called Canvas, and these are the parameters that I set it up with to make it look like this, and I think it looks great. A really simple interface that allows you to navigate through and then see all of your games at once. If you pause it for a moment, it'll also show a video playing of the game too, and so I really like this setup myself. Beyond that, the other main software things to keep in mind is that you can swipe down here and change out, say for example, your performance mode from standard to performance to high performance, or you can turn on your analog stick lights and then change your fan profiles, stuff like that. Also in the main Android settings, there's a handheld settings function, and here's got a couple things that you can change too. For example, under the Connect TV settings, you have the option to turn off your handheld screen when you plug it into a TV, and then also you've got two different video output modes. By default, it's going to be in TV mode, which is a standard 1920 by 1080 output. And with this setup, you can totally consoleize your handheld. You can plug it in directly into your monitor, and then just control it on the device itself if you want to be playing on a larger screen. And so this is one way that you can consoleize your device to be able to play it in a larger environment. Retroid also sells their own dock on their website. It's $30. It has HDMI output, Ethernet, as well as 4 USB ports. And so what you can do in a setup like this is connect it with a Bluetooth controller and then basically have a console-like or Switch experience where you can plug it in and then play your games with a separate controller. Not every emulation app is going to work out of the box like this. You may have to reconfigure the controls as you swap back and forth, but in general, yes, it's very easy to consoleize your handheld. Now the other video output mode is the RDS. That's for the Retroid dual screen attachment. This is also sold on their website. It's $70 and essentially just gives you a second display that's identical to the one found in the Retroid Pocket G2. I made a couple videos about this thing and I meant to go back and do a full-on review once I got the other adapter, but unfortunately I've been super distracted by other dual screen handhelds and I haven't come back to it, but I'm still hoping to make that video. In reality, it's just going to be the same experience as it was with the Retroid Pocket 5. So this is just a clamp and you will just clamp it onto your device and then you will plug in the cable. Now, one of the things about this is that the cable that comes with it is super long and I didn't like how much it kind of stood out. And so I found other solutions online that I put together myself, basically 2 small cables and then an adapter in between the two. And so this is what I've been using right here. I'll leave this all linked down below if you want to try it out yourself. But at the end of the day, it is a bit of a janky setup in that it just doesn't feel like a seamless device, but it does give you that second screen option, which is excellent for playing things like DS and 3DS. And it is pretty stunning to have 2 identical OLED panels to have for dual screen gameplay. Playing 3DS games like this is awesome. And this chip can handle 4x resolution upscale of 3DS content, absolutely no problem either. And so yes, this is an excellent way to play 3DS. There are certainly better ways to play this type of content, like the emU, which already has 2 screens attached to it. But if you've got a single screen device like the Retroid Pocket G2 and you want to pop on a second screen, I do see some merit in this kind of setup. So at the end of the day, I don't think it's going to win any awards, especially when it comes to like design and looks, just because, yeah, it's a little bit janky, but I do love the fact that we have this additional functionality. Okay, now let's talk about performance. We're going to start with some benchmarks and then we'll move on to actual gameplay. We're going to start with 3D Mark here, running the Wildlife Extreme stress test. This is a 20-minute test that goes in 1-minute loops. You can see here that the best score was a little bit over 3,000 and the worst score was around 2,800, which gives us a 92% stability. And the way it went is that it started at a pretty high score and then it dropped down to around 2,900, then around 2,800, around 10 minutes into it, and then it stuck with that all the way through to the end. So I would say on average, I would expect about 2,800 as your score, but there are going to be some times when it'll turbo boost up to 3,000. And if we look at the scores between the Retroid Pocket 5 and the Retroid Pocket G2, there is a huge difference here. You can see 1322 was the best score that I could get on the Retroid Pocket 5, and that is easily doubled by the Retroid Pocket G2. This is a GPU intensive test, mostly focused on, whether or not an Android-based game is going to run well, but you can see here that yes, this is a big difference between the two. And when we compare this to the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 processor found in the Odin 2, as well as the emU, and then also the upcoming Retroid Pocket 6, you can see that it is much closer to this chipset than it is the Retroid Pocket 5. These are about 3,600 compared to 3,000 compared to 1,300. And there are more powerful processors out there like the G3 Gen 3 found in the Conquer Pocket Fit. This one has a score of 4,599, so this one is quite a bit more powerful than the others too. And we are going to be getting some Snapdragon 8 Elite devices soon, like the Odin 3 and then the Elite version of the Conquer Pocket Fit. That'll give us even better performance. You can see with my phone here, 6291 with a Snapdragon 8 Elite. So this is still very excellent performance, but not the best out there. Moving over to another test, this is Geekbench 6 running a CPU related benchmark. So this is going to be a better indicator when it comes to emulation performance. So 1887 on the G2 compared to 1210 on the Retroid Pocket 5. So not a double in performance when it comes to single core speeds, but still pretty good. The Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 found in the Thor is just a little bit ahead of that, only 2022 here, and then 2200 with the Conquer Pocket Fit. Again, none of these compare to the Snapdragon 8 Elite, which just has a lot of raw performance power, but you can still see that this is a lot closer to the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 than it is the Retroid Pocket 5. Here's another test on Geekbench using the GPU Vulkan test. So you can see here 9410 on the Retroid Pocket G2, which is about 3 times better than the Retroid Pocket 5, but still very close to the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2, which got 9875. And then the Conquer Pocket Fit somehow just has a huge score, 19,000 and then 25,000 on the Snapdragon 8 Elite. So all this says to me when it comes to benchmarking that this is no slouch when it comes to performance. It's about on par with the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2, just a little bit below it, and definitely blows the Retroid Pocket 5 out of the water. So you might be wondering, what does it mean when it comes to actual emulation gameplay? So let's do some testing there. So here we are with God of War 2 on PlayStation 2. I'm running all of these games at the native 1x resolution right now. They're all running the same version of Nether SX2 Classic, and they're all in high performance mode. So we're going to be able to push this as far as we can. So right off the bat, you can see that all 3 of these games are running at full speed here at a native resolution. So no problem here whatsoever. You'll see like a red line at the top if it dips down, but as it stands right now, it's running just fine. So here we are at a 2x resolution upscale, and you can see that the Retroid Pocket 5 is starting to struggle a little bit. You can see that it's dipping down to about 90% speed in certain parts, but here, playing with the Retroid Pocket G2, no problem. And of course, same thing with the Odin 2, no problem here either. So what this says to me is we've already found the upper emulation limit of the Snapdragon 865 with this particular setup. Now, if we do the same with, say, the Retroid Pocket G2 and the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2, so let's actually move it up a little bit more. Let's do a 3x resolution upscale with these two and see how it plays out. Now with the 1080p screen, I usually play at a 2.5x resolution upscale, so I wouldn't need to go to a full 3, but you can still see that yes, on the Odin 2 it's running at full speed. Same thing with the Retroid Pocket G2. So yeah, these are both playing great. If we take it up another notch to a 4x resolution upscale, you can see that they're still playing pretty well. I get a couple slowdowns here with the Retroid Pocket G2. You can see that right then it slowed down a little bit, but the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 plays just fine. And so we started to find the upper limit of the Retroid Pocket G2 and that we get some slowdowns here at a 4x resolution scale. Now, this resolution is super high. It's beyond 1440p. It's beyond what the screen can actually handle in terms of pixels, and same with what it can output to a television. So there's no real need to output it to a 4x resolution anyway. 2.5x is going to be just fine. With the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 found on the Odin 2, I have to go to a 5x resolution to start seeing some slowdown. And so that's the upper limit on this device. So we're looking at 2x to get slowdown here, 4x to get slowdown on the Retroid Pocket G2 we're reviewing today, and then 5x resolution upscale on the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 and the Odin 2 before we start to see any slowdown. So what this says to me is that the Retroid Pocket G2 is going to help us get over the hump in some emulated games on PlayStation and GameCube. In case there were any that had problems on the Retroid Pocket 5, this should have enough raw performance power to get through that hump. The other kicker here is that you can play most PlayStation 2 and GameCube games at the standard performance mode and still get excellent performance. So here I am at 2.5x resolution. That's the resolution that I play when it comes to PlayStation 2, and I'm playing it in the standard performance mode. So I'm not playing it in high performance mode, and it's playing just fine. So that's another additional benefit of having a powerful chipset like the Snapdragon G2 Gen 2, is that we'll be able to play games at a higher resolution, but also at a lower performance profile to save on battery life as well. One last thing worth noting is that when you go into high performance mode on this device, by default it's going to go into sport fan mode, which is quite loud of a fan. It's not to the point of being like overbearing, but it is something that I have found that I noticed. Let me give you a quick audio sample between the sport and quiet modes so you can hear when the fan turns on and then turns off. So hopefully you can hear the difference there. It's not a big deal. I would say it gets to the point where you can notice the fan when it's in sport mode, but in everything else, it's so quiet you probably won't even hear it. Now, in preparing for this review, I spent an entire day just testing every single system on this device to see what it was capable of doing and to get a feel for this chipset, and I was really impressed. What we're going to do is really focus on the high-end stuff, like GameCube and beyond. But I also did want to note that all the classic systems are going to play great, much like they did on the Retroid Pocket 5. To give you the best idea of how classic games are going to run and the performance overhead that we have, let's try out Sega Saturn with Sega Rally Championship. This is one of the hardest games to emulate on this system, and I'm running it in RetroArch with the Beetle Saturn core, which is the most accurate but also the most demanding. In addition, I also slapped on the CRT Royale Slang shader, which is very demanding as well. Now, I had to put this into high performance mode, but I am able to play this game at full speed. Prior to this, the only systems that would actually be able to play under these parameters were the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 and beyond handhelds. And so this is pretty crazy from a retro gaming perspective. We're playing one of the hardest systems to emulate with the most demanding of the cores running on RetroArch with a very demanding shader, and it's still running at full speed. So now let's move on to the more demanding systems, starting with GameCube and then moving our way up. And with this system, it's a very plug-and-play experience. I'm able to just set it to OpenGL, which is the more demanding but more accurate video backend, and then a 3x resolution upscale, and just about every single game will play at full speed in the standard performance mode. There are always going to be some games that are problematic or maybe have some compatibility issues, but for the most part, I think you're going to be able to play through the vast majority of the GameCube catalog in these particular settings. There may be a couple games where you have to do some settings tweaks. For example, with F-Zero GX, this one plays better with the Vulkan backend than OpenGL, but still runs like a dream. And I also found that for F-Zero GX in particular, putting it in high performance mode did prevent any additional slowdowns. The standard performance mode was pretty good, but not quite there for a full 60 frames per second experience. The only other game that I had to make some adjustments to is Star Wars Rogue Squadron 2, which is notorious for being hard to emulate. For this game, I had to play it at a 2x resolution upscale, which I still think looks awesome, and it played absolutely fine. It's a similar story with Nintendo Wii. I set it to OpenGL in a 3x resolution upscale, and most of these games played fine in standard mode. Every once in a while I had to put it in high performance mode, but that was pretty few and far between. So when it comes to running the Dolphin emulator, this system has plenty of power to get through most of these games. It's also a very similar setup when it comes to Nether SX2. Like I mentioned when we were talking about God of War 2, I can play these games at a 2.5x resolution upscale, which is going to fit the resolution on this display, and I can play this in standard mode and it's still going to play great. And like with Dolphin, I played most of these games with the OpenGL backend and then switched it over to Vulkan if I was seeing any sort of graphical issues or if the performance was tanking a little bit. But for the most part, PlayStation 2 was an effortless experience when playing on the Retroid Pocket G2, and this is exactly where I personally love to be. With the Retroid Pocket 5, most of these games were going to be playable, but you had to go in and make some settings configurations here and there, either swapping out the video backend or maybe dropping down the resolution. But with the Retroid Pocket G2, it's more of a plug-and-play experience, which is what I personally love, because it reminds me of playing an old PS2, where I used to just pop in my disc and play it and not worry about any sort of settings. When you combine that with the OLED display and the upscaled resolution and all the widescreen hacks and interlacing patches that they have embedded in this emulator, it is really an upscaled experience. Now, some games did require me to adjust my overall gameplay. For example, with the Sly Cooper games, I had to turn them on the high performance mode just to get them to play smoothly, but yes, they are totally playable at 2.5x resolution. Another challenging game was Shadow of the Colossus. This one I had to drop down to a 2x resolution upscale in order to get it to play smoothly as well, but 2x resolution still looks a lot better than native, and yes, it runs absolutely smoothly. So this is how I would play this game as well. For the really demanding stuff like Champions of Norrath, which is known for not playing well with the Nether SX2 Classic build in particular, this one I had to drop down to a native resolution, but even then, after playing it for about 20-25 minutes, I only saw minimal slowdown. And so the way I see it, this is a win. The fact that we can play this game on an emulator that's not optimized for it in the first place. Next up is emu, the Wii U emulator, and this one is still very much in its early development cycle, but playing very well on the Retroid Pocket G2. Let's use Wind Waker HD as our example. This is a game that you can kind of sort of play on the Retroid Pocket 5 if you drop the resolution down to 720p and you're okay with living with a little bit of slowdown here and there. With the Retroid Pocket G2, I can play it at 1080p in standard performance mode, and even as shaders are compiling, it's still playing at a full 30 frames per second. So this is an excellent experience and much better than the Retroid Pocket 5. It really is going to come down to compatibility and whether or not the game is going to run on this emulator and whether or not it's compatible with turnip drivers. If we take a game like Mario Tennis Ultra Smash, you can see that with the stock drivers, it looks absolutely janky, but it appears to be playing at full speed. Now, if we load up the latest turnip drivers, all the graphical issues go away and it plays just fine, but it's a lot slower, only playing at about 40 frames per second, and so you are going to get some slowdown here. I saw something similar with Breath of the Wild 2. This one runs at about 27 frames per second on average with the stock drivers, which is just at the cusp of being playable to me at a 720p resolution. But unfortunately, with the stock drivers and this game, we get a lot of flickering in the background and it never seems to go away no matter how many shaders compile. Now with the custom drivers, we get much better graphics to the point where I'm not seeing any flickering whatsoever, but it does drop down the frame rate to about 22 frames per second on average. So there is a bit of a give and take here, and I would not really personally consider this game to be playable at 22 frames per second, but this is the closest that we've seen, and it's a lot better than it was on the Retroid Pocket 5. It's about where it is with the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2. So I would say the limitation here is not necessarily the performance power of the device, but rather just the maturity of the software development. Okay, and then finally for our last emulated system, we're going to just jump right into Nintendo Switch with the Eden emulator here, the most recent release, but then also the most recent turnip drivers. And the Retroid Pocket 5 could play a good amount of lightweight Switch games and some medium weight games too if you didn't mind fiddling around with the settings, and some people would even overclock their Snapdragon 865 to get better performance. And thankfully with this new Retroid Pocket G2, we don't have to do any fiddling with the settings. In fact, I'm able to play many of these games in the same settings that I would use with the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2. So to start, you can play just about every single game in docked mode, which is going to output to a 1080p resolution for most of these games. settings. In addition, like with the other emulated systems, you can start this out at the standard performance mode and really only kick in the high performance mode if you need it. And I found that the vast majority of these games played at full speed docked with the standard performance mode, which is really impressive. These are the same settings I use on my Odin 2. So as long as the game works with the emulator and the driver, we're looking at a system that basically plays at the same size as a Switch Lite, but with better performance given the fact that it can play in docked mode. And even as I started to go up in the harder to play games, things like Mario Wonder and Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, yes, I could play these in standard mode, 1080p docked mode. And thanks to those turn-up drivers, we got really good visual quality too. There were only a few games that had some issues like Octopath Traveler 2, but this one also has problems with some of the other chipsets, so I was not surprised to see this. I think the best example here is to show that Super Mario Odyssey can play in high performance mode, docked mode, and it plays just fine, 60 frames per second here, maybe a couple stutters here and there as shaders are compiling, but overall a very smooth gameplay experience. And again, this is about on par with the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2. The only real upper limit I found in terms of performance among the games that I usually test was Bowser's Fury. This one, when I played it in docked mode, couldn't quite hit 60 frames per second. That's because we're upscaling the resolution, and then in handheld mode, by default, it's going to run at 30 frames per second. So this is pushing a higher frame rate and higher fidelity. And unfortunately, that was a little bit too much for this chipset. So instead, I just dropped it down to the handheld mode or undocked mode, and this played absolutely fine. That is going to drop down the resolution to 720p and also play only at 30 frames per second, but it's still a very smooth experience when you make those little tweaks. So in the end, this is a very capable Nintendo Switch emulation experience here, where you can almost throw everything you want at it. You might see a couple limitations in terms of the overall RAM, because there's only 8 gigabytes here, and you might also see some performance limitation in some games. And as always, I would not recommend ever buying an Android device to replace a Nintendo Switch because emulation compatibility is not quite there. I would expect, only about 3/4 of games to even run at all. So like with all the other devices, I wouldn't say it's a Switch replacement, but it is pretty darn close, at least within this environment. Okay, now let's move away from emulation testing and start talking about PC gaming. If you haven't heard already, there are these new apps that are out that allow you to essentially play PC games on Android-based devices through compatibility layers. I've talked about this in other videos. I'll leave one link down below, but for this testing, I used GameHub. This allows me to log into my Steam account and play my actual Steam games here on Android. Now, there are some limitations of playing PC games on the Retroid Pocket G2 specifically. Number one is that many of these require a lot of RAM in order to play, and we're limited to 8 gigs of RAM with this device. Additionally, many of these apps like GameHub and Game Native require you to store the games on your internal storage unless you do a bunch of workarounds. And because we're limited to 128 gigabytes, that does limit how many games you can install on this device. So the way I see it, this is definitely more focused on playing, lightweight and middleweight games. And the nice thing is that yes, these games play absolutely fine here on GameHub. I spent a lot of time over the past few weeks playing PC games via GameHub and GameHub Lite on my AYN Thor, which has the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2. And I found that the performance between the Thor and the Retroid Pocket G2 that we're reviewing today is almost identical, to the point where I have a really hard time seeing any performance difference between the two. Now, I mostly play a lot of lightweight games because I think that's the sweet spot with this type of setup because they're going to be less demanding, they're going to take up less internal storage, and so that's what I've been playing here for the most part, and it's been an excellent experience. But it is also possible to find some games, even that are somewhat considered lightweight or medium weight, that don't play at full speed. For example, The Witness really struggles to play at full speed. I would say it's still playable at this point. After all, this is a puzzle game that doesn't require a lot of quick reflexes, but in general, yes, this is a game that was not able to keep up. Another good example is Slots and Daggers. This is a roguelike that has a slot-based mechanic to it, but some of this is skill-based where you have to press the right button at the right time, and because this only hovers around maybe 25 frames per second, it never really feels like it's playing at full speed. And so there are going to be some games that, yes, just don't play really well, especially something like this, which is brand new and unoptimized. But you might be surprised to find that even some heavier weight games that are very well optimized, like the first Tomb Raider game, this is the heaviest of the games that I tried try it out here, and it actually ran really well. So the way I see it, the performance here is going to be pretty close to the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2, much like we've seen in all the other emulation scenarios that we tried before. Your main limitations here are going to be the RAM as well as internal storage, and then of course a little bit of processing power gap as well. And then finally, let's talk about some streaming. So I tried out GeForce Now as well as Xbox Remote Play and cloud streaming, and all that worked well. The major limitation here for me was the control scheme, just because, most of these games are going to be twin stick style games, at least the ones that I like to play in a more modern setup. And so because of that, I do definitely recommend getting that grip to improve those ergonomics. But other than that, I think it was a pretty great experience. The 5.5-inch display does get a little bit small depending on what's happening on the screen, but I think it's still fully playable. I also tried out local streaming from my gaming PC over to this one using a tool called Apollo and Artemis. The great thing about this setup is that it matches your target display on the handheld, so it's going to run at 1080p 60 frames per second. This app also allows for really low latency, and I found that the average decoding time here with this particular chipset using the best settings possible was about 3 milliseconds, which is excellent. To me, this basically felt like I was playing locally, and that's exactly where I want to be when I'm playing streaming, so I think this is going to be an excellent streaming setup too. Okay, and before we wrap up, let's talk about battery life. I did some real-world testing here over the past few days. To start, I got 2% standby overnight. That means I put it to sleep and then came back 8 hours later and it drained 2%, and I think that's pretty good and pretty typical for most of these Android devices. So let's talk about battery life when actually playing the games, and of note, I played all these at 50% brightness and 50% volume. On the far right, we have our best case scenario. This is playing a Game Boy Advance game using RetroArch with the LCD3X shader and playing it in the standard performance mode. And with a setup like this, I projected about 16 hours and 20 minutes of overall gameplay time, and that's pretty crazy. And this is about what I would expect for all your retro systems, but you may get a little bit less battery life depending on the shader that you use. But yes, I'm thinking somewhere between 12 and 16 hours in most retro gameplay scenarios. So instead, I wanted to focus on the higher end systems and how much gameplay I could get there. So I started with Metroid Prime on GameCube. Here I'm running it with the standard settings that we were doing before, so a 3x resolution, OpenGL, standard performance mode. And with this setup, I got a little bit over 8 hours of gameplay time. Again, with a 5,000 milliamp hour battery, that is really efficient. From there, I wanted to try a more demanding Gen 6 game, so I went over to PS2 and played Jak 3. This is a much harder game to emulate, running with Nether SX2 Classic, 2.5x resolution, Vulkan backend, and the standard mode. And so this time around, I got about half the gameplay time that I got with Metroid Prime, which makes sense because this is a much more demanding game. So a little bit over 4 hours of gameplay here, which I still think is very decent when playing PS2. From there, I pushed it a little bit further with Nintendo Switch running in docked mode with Super Mario Wonder. And this time again, playing in standard mode because this game can play at full speed like that. And this game is a little bit more demanding than PlayStation 2, and so in this example, I got a little bit over 3.5 hours of gameplay time, which again, I think is pretty great. And then finally, on the far left, we've got our worst case scenario. This is playing Slots and Daggers, a game made for PC via GameHub. And despite it looking like a 2D game, it's a very challenging game to play, even on PC handhelds. So in this example here, I had to push it to high performance mode, and it was pretty taxing. I got a little bit over 2 hours of gameplay altogether. And so this is kind of the spectrum that I am looking at here, where if you're going to really push it, you can only get about 2 hours of gameplay time. But depending on what else you're playing, if it's something really lightweight, it can be up to 16 hours of gameplay. So all in all, I think there's no surprises here, given the size of this battery and this efficient chipset. I think all of this looks pretty good. Now, with all that testing out of the way, let's go ahead and wrap up and talk about what I think when it comes to the Retroid Pocket G2. And I think it's worth giving credit where credit is due. The Retroid Pocket 5, which essentially is this device but with a spec bump, still is an amazing handheld, and all of those features are available here. The controls are decent, the ergonomics are very comfortable, and we have that beautiful display, which I still love here a year later. I also love the 2 new color options they have available. I really like the turquoise one, but the yellow one still looks really great. And as we've seen throughout this video, this is a pretty significant spec bump, given the fact that the price here is almost identical to the Retroid Pocket 5 itself. It's pretty crazy that for around $200, we're approaching Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 levels of performance. Now, of course, it's not perfect, but it's funny that a lot of the issues that are with this device have nothing to do with the device itself, but rather the circumstances in which it's launching. And number one is that we have a very crowded market. There aren't really any devices that perform this well well at this price point, but there are many other options out there for a little bit more. And then the other thing to consider is that this is really just a spec bump, and if you already have a Retroid Pocket 5 and it meets all of your gaming needs, then this might not do it for you. At the end of the day, I think the Retroid Pocket G2 is kind of an amazing handheld. It's incredible to think that for around this price point, we are getting so much performance on a device that has so many good things going for it. But at the same time, life can be a little bit complicated, and I think that the decision of buying this device is a little bit complicated too. Like I said in the intro, at face value, this thing is a really good deal. At around $200 to $220 before shipping, we're looking at something that has basically everything I would ever want in a retro handheld. And so on its own, yes, this is a very easy device to recommend. And it is kind of crazy that for this price point, we are getting performance that is very close to the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 devices that have dominated the high-end market all throughout the past couple years. But that's also kind of the crux of the issue, because for an additional $10, you can get a Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 device in the Retroid Pocket 6, which comes out in January. And on top of that, you will have a bunch of other bells and whistles, like the ability to customize where you want your D-pad placement, and you also will have a higher refresh rate screen at 120 Hz, which will help with things like input latency and just overall smoothness when playing a game. It's also got a bigger battery at 6,000 milliamp hours, and the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 is also Linux compatible, and so I would expect to see Linux custom firmwares available for the Retroid Pocket 6 in the future too. And so when you put it all together, it is kind of complex. The Retroid Pocket G2 is an excellent handheld and one of the best values I've ever seen in a handheld as well, but it is severely undercut by the upcoming Retroid Pocket 6. And so at the end of the day, it really is going to come down to you. Do you like the look of this handheld? Do you want something that's D-pad centric? Do you want something before Christmas? If so, then yes, I would say the Retroid Pocket G2 is the best device to buy right now. But I also fully expect that the Retroid Pocket 6 is going to snatch that crown from the Retroid Pocket G2 in about 2 months, and that's a really short wait time. And so I think that in general, if you're looking for your most bang for your buck and you don't mind waiting through the holidays, then the Retroid Pocket 6 is the one to keep your eye on. And it is a shame because that takes away from how excellent the Retroid Pocket G2 is. It's only overshadowed by Retroid's own launch cycle. So long story short, I think two things are true at the same time. The Retroid Pocket G2 is an excellent handheld that has amazing performance for its price, and it's also a handheld that feels like it's going to become obsolete in about 2 months' time. Anyway, that's all I got for this video. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. Are you going to pick up the RPG 2, or are you going to wait for the Retroid Pocket 6, or do you have something else that you're playing with in the meantime? As always, thank you for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe if you found this helpful, and we will see you next time. Happy gaming.